Everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a 12-game Major League Baseball slate here. This slate is pretty good. We do have some weather issues. You're gonna need to be keeping an eye on the Washington game, the New York Yankees game, and the Boston game. So do keep that in mind here. With that said, let's go ahead and get started. Before I do, though, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? It really does help the channel a lot. So let's go ahead and get into our pitchers here. We're gonna start with Lopez for Minnesota. Now he's had 20 fantasy point per game average this season, and a 20 fantasy point game is in order here. He's only had one ceiling game since the first 3 games of the season, but he also has faced Seattle in his last start and gave up just 2 earned runs and had 7 strikeouts. So he's got some good upside, though he is a little bit risky. I don't tend to love using guys in matchups that they just faced before, but he does have some utility here, though he is also fairly expensive. Then we'll look at Blake Snell for San Diego. Now, if you remove the last game versus Toronto, he had 9 straight over 20 fantasy points. He's also getting wins and getting a very good K rate. He gave up just 1 earned run versus Toronto. He just didn't get the strikeouts, but this matchup is a lot better and gives him a lot of utility to be a really solid play on the slate. He was very close to being a core play on this one. Then we'll look at Morton for Atlanta. Now, he does face a tough matchup here against Boston, so he is risky, but he's been mostly solid all year. He's only had, in his 1 game, against Boston, earlier this season, he had 7 strikeouts and gave up 2 earned runs and scored 23 fantasy points. This matchup isn't super ideal, but he's been good versus good teams all year, too. And it looks like he's got some good upside here, though I do like some Boston bats in this game, and there's also a weather risk at this game as well. Then we'll look at Corbin Burnes from Milwaukee. He's been getting better in the last few weeks, and he's having a lot of ceiling games. Excuse me. The Reds have been a tough team recently, but he has faced them 3 times this season, and he scored 40, 21, and 18 fantasy points. This game is not in Cincinnati, which also helps. He's given up 5 earned runs in those 3 starts and had 26 strikeouts, so he definitely has some really good upside in this matchup. Then we'll look at George Kirby for Seattle. Now, I'm mentioning him here because he had 10 strikeouts and gave up no earned runs in his last game versus Minnesota, which was his last start. He has really good upside here as a result, though he is also cheaper, so that gives him some upside as well. That said, he's been inconsistent with the strikeouts all year, and I tend to not like pitchers against the same team they just pitched against the last game, but he definitely has the upside, but his ceiling is good, his floor is really bad as well. Then we'll look at, excuse me, Civicell for Cleveland. Now, he is cheap today, and that gives him some upside here, though his K rate has been inconsistent this season. He has a high-risk situation, as he's in 11 starts. He's only had 2 over 20 fantasy points and 1 over 30. That said, that 30 fantasy point game did happen to be against Kansas City, and he had 9 strikeouts and only gave up 2 hits in 7 innings. The reason he's not really scoring 20 fantasy points a lot, though, is mostly because he's just not going super deep in games. A lot of the games he's going to 5 innings at the most, and so that's what's been slowing down his fantasy potential, because he's not giving up a ton of earned runs, and as you can see, he hasn't given up a ton of anything. So his ERA is really solid. It's just he doesn't go deep enough in games usually to pay off, and his K rate is somewhat inconsistent. So, but this matchup does give him some utility. Moving into our catchers here, we're going to start with Sean Murphy for Atlanta. Now, whether he or d'Arnaud starts today, I do think it'll be Murphy because he took a game off recently, but he does have some good utility here. He's not hitting the ball quite as well recently, so he's been a little bit slumpy, but he has home run potential, and that's why I do like him here today, as he draws a great matchup here against Boston, who he's had 2 really good games against so far this season. Then we'll look at William Contreras for Milwaukee. He has been really good recently, even without a ton of home runs. He has really good utility and home run metrics for this game. He also has good hitting potential here, as he's hitting a ridiculous .325 over the last 10 games, though he has been somewhat boom or bust in the fact that he has some 0 games and then has a bunch of multi-hit games, but he's definitely a good player and has some good upside in this matchup. Then Cal Raleigh for Seattle. He's been somewhat boom or bust recently with the home runs, and his batting average has improved a little bit, but he's still got some upside here from a home run perspective. He does kind of need to have one to pay off here, but he is capable of that in this matchup, and his home run metrics are off the charts. Then we'll look at Francisco Alvarez for the Mets. He is hitting pretty inconsistent recently as well. He's got a lot of home run upside, but he's also kind of a boom or bust guy, though he is capable of having some really big fantasy point games, as he's had several recently. He just has a couple, he does strike out a lot recently, which is concerning, but he does have some potential here in this matchup as a contrarian play. Moving to first base, we'll look at Freddie Freeman, who's absolutely crushing the ball this season, and he has hitting really good recently as well. Even if he doesn't hit a home run today, he's got the possibility of getting a lot of hits and getting on base and doing different things. He's managed to score fantasy points a lot of different ways, and he's got good metrics here for this game as well, though he is very expensive. Then we'll look at Pete Alonso. Now, Pete Alonso had been in a slump. He's finally had a few good games in a row where he had some multi-hit games, and so I do like his upside here. It looks like he might be getting his hitting in order, as he said, 4 games in a row now with hits, so maybe he's going to start hitting the ball really well again, and he definitely has home run potential, and he's a little bit underpriced due to the slump he was in. Then we'll look at Wilmer Flores, who's hitting about as well as anybody over the last 10 games. He has 5 home runs in the last 10. Now, he doesn't play every day, so that is something to note, but if he draws the start today, he will have really good upside in this one, and he has great metrics here. He's hitting the ball extremely well, and he's going up against a pitcher who's very weak. You could also consider Matt Olson, Christian Walker, Cody Bellinger, Josh Naylor, Nate Lowe, Kevin Sheets, and Justin Turner at this position. Moving to second base, we'll start with Ozzy Albies, who is a core play for me today, as he has hit the ball inconsistent recently, but he finally got out of a slump and hit a big home run the last game. I expect that will get him going again. He has managed to score some fantasy points, but he just has been unlucky when it comes to his hits going, when he actually hits the ball going to right at batter or at infielders and stuff. But he has hit the ball pretty well this season, despite that, and it looks like he might be getting out of a slump now, so he is definitely a play that I like in a very plus matchup against Boston. Then we'll look at Ketel Marte for Arizona. Now, he draws really good metrics here, and he's hit the ball extremely well recently, averaging over 12 fantasy points a game, though he's had some really giant games recently, which do help pad that stat. He's also fairly expensive as well, just like Albies, but he definitely draws good metrics here and has some nice utility, especially if you go with the Arizona stack. Then we'll look at Kim for San Diego for against Pittsburgh. He is absolutely crushing the ball recently. I didn't really expect him to get going this hot, but he's had some really big games lately, including 3 home runs in the last 3 games. He had 2 yesterday, and I like his upside here again. He's got good hitting upside, and he doesn't really strike out a lot, and that gives him some nice utility here on the slate. Then we'll look at Julian for Minnesota. Now, he's high risk, high reward here, but it's hard to ignore the fact that he's just absolutely crushing the ball. If he draws the start today, then he'll be somebody to consider, but he is facing a pitcher I do like a little bit, so he is high risk, high reward here. Then we'll look at Justin Turner, another guy that's facing a pitcher I do like, but he's been pretty consistent recently, and he's hitting home runs, and that's what we like to see when we're utilizing batters, so he has home run upside here, but he definitely has some risk as he's facing Morton, who's been pretty good lately. Moving to third base, we'll look at Austin Riley for Atlanta. Now, obviously, he has been in an absolute tear as he's had home runs in every game with the exception of the last one over the last week. He had 5 games in a row with the home run, including a 2 home run game against Arizona. His fantasy points have just been absolutely massive. He has really good utility here. The batting average is solid, and if he can get a hold of one, it's likely he can pull one out again, as the metrics here are off the charts for him. We're also going to look at Rafael Devers for Boston. Now, he's a little bit cheaper because he's been in a slump most of the season, but he's finally starting to get going. He's had 4 home runs the last 10 games, and he's starting to hit over 300 now. He's just getting hits in every game just about, and so I really like his upside, and his price is nice and cheap compared to Riley as well. He's a great contrarian option. Alex Bregman is also in play, as he has also hit the ball extremely well, though he's a lot more expensive and somewhat hard to roster. We have a lot of good options here at third base, but there's not a lot of value. So I definitely think paying up at this position is viable, and there's, 3 guys there right there that you can really utilize here. But if you must find some value here, we're going to start with Evan Longoria at Arizona. Now, he has been in a slump, but he has some home run potential, and occasionally he has really good upside. He has hit the ball the last couple games now, so maybe he's seeing the ball a little bit better again. Then we'll look at Jameer Candelario for Washington, as he draws some really good metrics here. He's hit the ball pretty inconsistent throughout the season, but he's getting some home runs recently, which is really upping his value here, and I like his potential, especially for a game where they have some nice upside. Though there is some risk here for weather, being an issue, but we will have to track that. Moving into shortstop, we're going to look at Bo Bichette first. Now, Bo is in a bit of a slump as he hasn't hit the ball very well recently, but he does have home run upside in this game, and he did take a game off, even though he ended up coming in the game, the last game. He has some good metrics here, and I think he getting a breather here will help him get back to going like he has been. Then we'll look at Gunnar Henderson. Sorry, why did I put Gunnar Henderson here? I don't think Baltimore is even on the slate. They're on the early slate. Sorry about that. Well, Kim can also play at shortstop, and he's a very good option here. I do like his upside, and he's probably very close to a core play at this position. Then we'll look at J.P. Crawford for Seattle. I do like J.P. Crawford today, as he's hit the ball really well with a 342 average. He doesn't have a ton of home run upside, but he is hitting the ball nice and solid, so I think he's somebody that's a good contrarian play, and he's nice and cheap and helps you play at other positions. Then we'll look at Abrams for for Washington, as he has absolutely just been monstering the ball. He's had some really big games recently, and that has really boosted his fantasy potential. In fact, I think he's had 10 fantasy point games in the last 9 games, so he draws really good metrics here, and he's hitting about as good as anybody right now, and so I do like his upside a lot. Then we'll look at outfielders, and we'll start with Ronald Acuna Jr. He is averaging a 300 batting average over the last 10 games. He's hit the ball very well, and I do think he has home run potential in this one. He's had 2 straight 2-hit games and 2 straight games of stolen bases as well, and that gives him a lot of upside here. Then we'll look at Tatis Jr. for San Diego. Now, he's been somewhat up and down throughout the season, and he's been a little bit slumpy recently, but he does draw home run potential in this game, and that's why I like him here, and Hill's not a very good pitcher on this particular slate. Tucker for Houston is also in play. He's absolutely just destroying the ball with a 432 average, averaging almost 17 fantasy points a game as well. Now, a lot of that's due to the fact he's had several 25 plus fantasy point games lately, but my goodness, when you're hitting like that, it's hard to ignore. And he doesn't even need to hit a home run, as he's hitting over 10 fantasy points a lot of these games without them. So obviously he does have good home run up metrics though here as well. Then Austin Slater for San Francisco. Now, he is very home run or bust at this point, as he doesn't have a whole lot of home run upside, but he does draw good metrics here. And while he is striking out too much and he doesn't score fantasy points a lot of games, he does have some utility here. He's just been in a bit of a slump. Then we'll look at Lane Thomas for Washington. Now, he was hurt in the last game, but it looks like he should be good to go here. If he does play today, he'll be in play, as he's hitting the ball really well recently. I like his potential here, fantasy-wise, as he has home run upside and a little bit of stolen base potential, though he may not try to steal a base here in this game with getting hit in the last one. Then we'll look at Jarren Duran for Boston. Now, he is hitting the ball pretty well, despite not scoring a ton of fantasy points. He's had some big games, though, and he draws good home run metrics here, so that's why I kind of like him. Though he's not a huge home run guy, he does have some potential for that occasionally, and this is definitely one of those situations. The Chicago White Sox are definitely in play today, and Eloy Jimenez's price has dropped down quite a bit here now to right at 4,000, which gives him some really nice utility. He was pretty expensive for a little while, and so I do like him at this price range. He's got home run potential, and he's hitting the ball pretty well recently as well with a 314 average. Benintendi is also in play for Chicago, though I don't like him quite as much as I like Eloy. He's also nice and cheap at just $2,900, so he helps you pay up at other positions, and he does have some good metrics here. He's not a home run player, but he is a guy that can hit the ball and score fantasy points. Then we'll look at Ozuna for Atlanta. Now, he has been in an extreme slump, so he is a home run or bust call, but he tends to get going at some points, and then he'll slump off for a little while. But he does have home run potential, and he's going to draw a good matchup here, so I do like his upside. Then we'll look at Bellinger for Chicago White Cubs. Now, I really like his upside here, though. He's a little bit expensive. He's hitting the ball about as good as anybody in the last couple weeks, and he's had 3 straight games over 14 fantasy points with 2 home runs. He's also just getting hits in every single game for a while, with the exception of a couple games. He's just hitting the ball extremely well, hard to ignore, and I really like his upside here. And then Yoshida for Boston, another guy that's hitting the ball really well, hitting 326 over the last 10 games. He has some home run upside, but not quite as much as Bellinger does, but he definitely draws good potential here. For sub 3,000 priced options, Andrew Benintendi for the White Sox can play in the outfield, Alex Kirilloff for Minnesota for first base, Jake McCarthy for Arizona in the outfield, Luis Matos for San Francisco in the outfield, and Tristan Casas for Boston at first base. Are all in play as very cheap plays that help you pay up at other positions. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.